Are you ready? I will start reading
Yes.
now. Okay, and we'll do the exercise. So, perceive your surroundings and focus on something that catches your attention. I'll give you a few seconds and then I'll continue. Name the thing and ask yourself lightly, how is this thing affecting the world? What are its potential capacities? I'll repeat. How is this thing that caught your attention? How is it affecting the world? What are its potential capacities? Now choose any of the qualities that come to your mind and write it down in the next format. Name and quality. So what's the name of the thing and what's the quality? Okay. Now let's play it. Let its quality modify an aspect of your behavior, the way you speak, the way you move, or how you perform a specific task. Imagine how this changes the way you perceive the world and how you relate to others and your surroundings. That is an OXEL, an organizational element with operational capacities. That's it. I guess it was not enough time, but you get the idea. Maybe something came up for you.
Wonderful.
Yes, very good. Very good.
It's it's
Good.
weird, no? Like, did it work? Like, what did you come up with? How? Yeah, let me know.
Hello. Um, you just repeat that last sentence. This is an oxel, and then
An organizational element with operational capacities.
check.
I think that definition could use some ambiguous markup language, ambiguity expression markup language to become more diverse, but it's a starting point.
I think it's a good
I,
one still.
that was absolutely wonderful. So everything about it. I just love how you went straight to the affect and you man, I really that was wonderful. That was wonderful.
Oh, that's so nice to hear. That's great.
Yeah, dude. It takes genius to bring something into, this level of crystalline,
It
like,
took a while, especially to make it short.
that's the thing. That's what I respect like the most of all.
Yeah, and I like it as like engine wise that you're wrapping it in a kind of mystery, but not an empty mystery of the oxide. So it's not nothing. You also defined it, but essentially starting to use it as such is still like mystery, but not in a negative fashion. Like more in the sense of I have to generate from here to explicate and detail. So like it's a very like meditation-like take. Like
Yeah.
Kind of.
not just in like using meditation as a loose descriptor, but kind of like that like if you look at the kind of principles of at least certain schools of meditation, there's this sort of contemplation, concentration part, but contemplation, concentration on a mystery, and not just the insane emptiness, but the kind of generative ones. It actually shares many interesting qualities of it, but of course it's not a traditional conventional meditation. It just has similar operational qualities.
Yeah, I agree.
I like to
It's
share the
also
card that it made. Oh, but no.
yeah. Go for it. Go for it.
I saw a flower, and there's this purple flower here, and then you were saying, yeah, so now I've got a card with purple vibe, and so I was like imagining, right? You were saying like the thing, and I was just imagining like the purple. What is this flower doing? It is just emanating, resonating purple vibes. And then I like tried to embody that, and I was like, what? So yeah, man, wow.
That's great. That's great. I'm definitely feeling the purple vibes come through. So that's beautiful.
Yeah, and there's also this resonance of like people give magic many forms, but the kind of moment when you're giving something a name, but you don't stop there. It's not like I just classified something. Like even if you make a new name that you behave like I'm just classifying now, and I'm giving it the name that it shuts up its sensual noise. But rather you name in order to use the evocative power that now there is a relation between the name, which is a different kind of unit of meaning with the sense itself, which doesn't collapse, but actually kind of stays as this kind of tension. And then you utilize that tension. And that moment is in itself, like for me, like it's too much to call it magical or kind of also too shallow, but it has this precisely this sort of how meaning is generated, but also your self processes are changed by your expressions, and how you change your relation to an environment through your own expressions, kind of qualities.
It is in the realm of magic.
Mm-hmm.
Just to be clear.
Yeah, it's very like in a way, like I don't disagree. It's only like some people then categorize it into magic and then leave it there, like in normal culture. And I think the importance is what happens in it.
That's
Mine
great.
was really weird. Mine was really
Go.
weird.
Go.
Yeah. Mine was a bag that I had picked up from Rosa, who had just bought a painting and she had put it in that bag. And so my object was a bag with a painting. And one of the important properties it had was that it could release a painting. And so then I tried to kind of scale that. Like, how does that how do I deal with things that release paintings?
Mm-hmm.
Painters, I heard people call them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the yeah.
Yeah, I had a mind block. I couldn't get from the bag to the painter so quick.
Oh.
Okay, I will
Very
quickly
interesting.
share mine, but I want to keep it short. But I think it's only fair to maker of it to give some response. Like so mine was actually on a wall. I have some notes that are mostly text, taped on because I have to remember them. But then some of them have like not really drawings, but me making a pen work, which kind of becomes this sort of masses. And I picked one of the masses because it had this quality, which I made a note of. This was the original, like focus. It having a nested landscape. that is like, if you look at it as a landscape, it starts to turn into a landscape. And I named it nested landscape in quotation marks because it was both the template and an instance of a nested landscape. And so in a way, like with the name, I wanted to kind of give it a role as an idea of this nested landscape forming, and therefore its quality was actually question or query to itself. So query of the nested landscape. And this created an interesting process where you see a certain landscape, but then you hold yourself back saying it's only about this. Like, which can be interesting, that you point to some person like, oh, look at this in this way, it's a landscape, and then they say, oh yeah, but then that's kind of becomes fixed and frozen by itself. Now here it would pull back and potentially do it again, or potentially do it elsewhere, and be a kind of reminder and linchpin towards that.
Wow, that's great. I was not expecting this to be so good. That's great. Mine was very stupid. I was thinking warm oil and heat transfer. And I was just thinking of remembering through, like, if there is heat transfer when you remember things, and the things you remember the most get warmer, what could that mean? So that was mine.
But these are all good, and this is something I would take a note of. Is
I love this stuff.
once you step off the road, the road paved by conventions, and you walk in the grass, there is a kind of liveliness to meaning itself, and liveliness to process through that.
I mean, there better be. Otherwise, what are we doing this?
Mm-hmm. Who wants to go next? Or does somebody want to add still something? Martin.
You're muted. I like it though. It's like interpretive.
Sound.
Now, yes.
Yeah,
now
I'm
it's
like
about
doing
to-
the sign language. I should need to learn sign language. Yeah, I think I could go next because I'm expecting something equally maybe poetic from the other two of you, and I went a little bit more involuntarily somehow, but I went a little bit more reflexive maybe on the thing, because I thought that like something that I've been really enthralled by in the cards, in connection with the cards, has been these particular qualities that last time I think I framed as platonic. I don't still know a better term for it, so I wanted to kind of check what does that mean for me. I don't know if I can share screen around this.
Yes, you should be able to. There is the screen with an arrow. Is a share screen button.
Oh yeah, that one. Yes. So select window or screen. I'll just go with the screen for ease of application. So can you see this kind of self-containing thing right now?
Yes.
We see us into infinity, yes.
Yes, super. So I began a little bit with writing some stuff, and then I began with cutting out some parts, and then I went to writing. And before I started writing, I took this picture. Can you see that picture?
Mm-hmm.
This is art, man.
So that's like a tree trunk that I took here from the street, and I wanted to use it for a stool, but it was really awkward to move. So I put two handles. You see only one of them, like on the other side, there's the other one, so that we could carry it around more easily. Rosa is actually just now sitting on it. But that's not the point. The point is the orange thing, which I thought would be able to express basically what I find the element of the card to be affording. So, and like we already basically defined, I think Pekko, you spelled that out in the end of the last meeting. It has an exterior, the card has an exterior systematic and has an interior systematic. And the way that I wrote that down now for myself was that, so like axiomatically speaking, so the card would have to be is something that is disconnected, like in which it is unlike a tree or a page or a river. So it has some exterior independency. Then it is something also, and I think that's really, really necessary, that it is fillable, so that it has an interior indefinition. I don't know if that's a word, but I trust that you understand that. And then the third thing is that it's playable. So that, and this is where, like, I think I got one step further in the whole jazz here, that there's a playing subjectivity that is able to reach for a card and put it into play. So then I would just kind of go through a bit stupidly now through what I wrote down. This is actually already kind of an outcome of what of the kind of all the other steps that I then went through, so that one could say that cards are an imaginative lifting of anything. Well, basically, it's a lifting of anything into the maybe experimental or into the imaginative, or how to then call it. So, but it's basically that process to me that like in the kind of Platonic sense could make a card. I will maybe go to this one here. Can you see what I'm highlighting? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can see.
Yes, yeah, we can see.
Yeah. So because then I asked myself, so, and this is not deep, and these are also very early stuff. Like, could an object be a card, like a pre-existing, so to speak, object, a bottle or a table or a house or some country or so? And I said, like, I thought that now it cannot, because it doesn't fulfill the axiom number 2, meaning this inner indefinition. So it is conceptually already kind of shaped in a way, or it does exist in this kind of extent. But I can make a card of anything, as we already tried, right? So whether like for example, like a table is not a card, it can't be a card, but I can make a card of this very table. And then by that, going back to the definition, so to speak, I have then lifted it into the kind of domain of the imaginative and can now operate with it in that way. And I think the thing that then became interesting, and I think that's like particularly interesting in our kind of so to say projection canvas of the organization, is that once I do that, which is the materiality of the card? So let's say I have a table and I decide that I make a card of that table. In that moment, following the axioms and definition, I have lifted it into the imaginary. But which is now the card? And then I thought that basically at that moment, the card can have any sort of materiality. The possibility of existence of which depends on my, momentary agency. Meaning, if it is so that I, for example, I as a human being make a card of a country, I can play that card in any game in a kind of experimental, conceptual way, as a thought materiality. Should I, however, have the capacity, the power of, like some superhuman being, or if my object is not a country but really a table, after I made a card of that table, I can also play that table in its own physicality. So I can go through the experimental moves either by using the kind of thought materiality of the card I created, or the physical materiality of the thing that I made the card of. So I can push the table around and say, now I play this as a card over there, and I'd see what it does next to the shelf, or I play it as a card over here and I see what it does when it blocks the door, etc. So I can both do that. So I can do that in a number of materialities. I don't know which other ones, but I thought that was an interesting finding, which maybe we haven't so much thought about, but maybe we have, and I forgot it. So like here's this kind of same example as a kind of with a galaxy. So like some subjectivity, the playing subjectivity, could make a card of this our galaxy. And if it had the agency of pushing it around, you can say, okay, I put that behind that nebula over there and see what happens then. But it can also just play around it with a thought. I think the point where that becomes interesting is when you start playing with real organizations and thinking of, okay, so they have stuff standing around, or they have salaries to pay, or so on. So they can make cards of those things and then push them around as experimental units, so to speak, in their thought, or in reality, while these things still maintain, so to speak, their experimental separation, even if that's a lie, as we know, because procedural rhetoric and so forth. But that was basically where I went with this. Yeah, and then I didn't get very far through this kind of the more game side of the cards, but maybe I leave it at this.
This is great. I love it. It's so good. The lifting part really clarifies like some of the capacities of cards, right? Like lifting into this realm, which reminds me of something Peko has said multiple times, which is that games are agnostic to reality. I don't know if that's the exact phrasing, but I think that's the place where you're lifting things to that space.
Mhm. Yeah, and also like you're lifting, like if one makes a comparison, like to the earlier comments that in a way cards could be seen a parallel structure to concepts. Now, if we think of words and their relation to concepts, they have a similar but not the same. I think actually the way you explore the space of that the materiality stays, like the materiality of the word can stay, but then there is the space of the and it's too simple to say meaning, but the kind of card existence. Like in your explorations, you found differences in this card reality, but it was using the same dyadism, I guess, in a way like word has a materiality, but has to be lifted up to actually be a word, but it doesn't do away with the materiality in itself. And I really like that part because I think not only you were kind of pointing this kind of structure or similarity, which I think is very good and very fertile to point out, but you were also finding specialities, differences in the card likeness.
Yeah, I thought it was awesome. I thought it was dope. I love it. I really appreciate the general tendency that we are having of really, it seems like we are crystallizing to a higher and higher platonic, you know, notion of what, yeah, but we're also approaching it in different ways. And I think that's fucking sick.
I think, Leo, if I could just comment on this with the platonic. So like I use that because I don't have better ways to bracket what I was trying to be doing. I think I could also have said the card as a primitive. Maybe that would have been better.
I think platonic is even closer because it's like,
But I'm not, because there's a thing that I'm like where I'm not a core with the platonic, which is that what I thought I saw now with this is that when we have been dealing in these sessions here with cards, right? Then Pekka, you say like, okay, we could make a card of this, and that could have this and this. So where are we dealing with that? We're dealing with these in a thought materiality that is kind of suspended or kind of expressed through the sound we share, and all the kind of stuff that we have, all the kind of memories that we have, and how we kind of have been constructing each on our side these concepts. So that is the materiality that we manipulate. So that means there's a certain energy economy to this. We can do this. We sit down, no problem, no sweat. But we have great, latitude, agility in that space. So this is one way in which it's not platonic, because it's the thing, the material thing. It just is another materiality, as, imagine that the figure of, that the animal crossbreeder would exist as a real thing with blood that's born from a mother and dies at a point. So that, like, to take a crossbreeding animal and push it from this part of the room to another room is another materiality. Or, to be less abstract, take a bottle or so. So like, that's what I thought was interesting, but because it would allow me to think this to other contexts of application. For example, when I go to a person who is setting up an art gallery or setting up a playground for kids, and say, so, okay, now we make a card of this thing. What subjectivity, what agency do we need in order to play that thing as a card? If I don't cut between, now it's a concept, which is an immaterial thing, because that's precisely what I'm trying not to say. What I'm trying to say is that the concept is also one of the materialities that the card can have, because it is physically suspended. It's physically.
Yeah, maybe like yeah, I mean, when you say, like, when you're throwing these words like lifting and suspension and stuff, I can't help but think of Aufenboon, and like the bringing of a concept into suspension, and then going beyond it, and that is a moment of playing with turning things into concepts and then lifting them, and then they're no longer just that.
I'm not familiar with that. With this.
This is one of the few times when Leo brings in Hegelian notion, and I'm in agreement with him. And, which is a joke. It has happened several times, but just.
Oh, I'm glad.
Yeah. It's also like. I think actually thinking this through the perspective of Hegel is an interesting pathway, which would be a can of worms, maybe at some point to open.
It's I'll send a thing, Martin, but it's I will say this again and again. I really believe that Hegel saw this all coming, and not that I even understand what he's saying all the way, at all. But yeah, the whole point of like the way he writes is that his literary work is about the concept being lifted, and then like deleted, suppressed, no, not deleted, preserved, but transformed, changed. And his entire writing is like, if you imagine it card after card, every word, right? Like card, every word, every new word is supposed to like take and then go outwards. And so people are like, this guy's impossible read, because I really think like he's following the move. I mean, no, but that he says it himself, right? Like that he is just like trying to become the secretary of the unfolding concept. And so, yeah, I think he's, but he might have been less, he might have been, I don't think he necessarily viewed it too much through play as he might have been. That's more of like the beautiful soul people.
I mean, there's actually several cans of worms in this direction, like a lot of Derrida's early work like I won't say constituting work, even though that would be kind of crude, especially using that kind of word for his approaches. But it's based on kind of or Aufhebung and the kind of, let's say, extension or expansion from the Aufhebung is a part of it, and that also brings in not play per se, but let's say qualities that then leave tendrils that open towards play in itself. Like, but yes, like there's also like actually, Martin, your way of approaching the card rising from materiality really actually wasn't too far off of certain qualities of Hegelian Aufhebung, which is not a bad thing, I think, at all.
No, I think it's freaking crazy.
There was no, like, what I was wondering about, and that's the thing
There's
that I
some
didn't.
kind of audio somewhere.
Yeah, I have a baby. The baby found the sledge. The baby is dragging the
Okay.
sledge through the apartment. So I'm sorry about that. I hope you can.
No, it's
still-
okay. It's a part of the Zorgian calls your kids.
Yeah.
The one thing that I think I stumbled upon, but I couldn't or I didn't do something with now, is the way in which that which I described is similar to framing. Because I think it's not framing, because it really kind of it really includes this a different motion of isolation, so to speak, of a thing from where we happen to just have found it. Like the card making of a thing is not just putting a kind of lens, like not a focus frame around it, but it's also like kind of chopping it, like, scooping it, so to speak, out of where it just was, and then mobilizing it in, whatever materiality one then chooses to mobilize it. But this is where this ends. I just kind of ran into the framing thing, and I didn't just continue to look into that further.
That's an interesting topic in itself. Like, for me, I agree in terms of like what you described. For me, also, like I go back and forth, or one could go both directions. It's almost like a choice of rhetorics. Whether one thinks that one has to expand framing because of what you just outlined, and I agree with the kind of problematic you said, or the division you said, or is that a question then to expand the sense of framing, or is it a question of creating a separate concept from it? Both have their reasons, but I agree that in a way, like one has to make a difference with the, let's say, a classic sense of framing. Some people have worked at in framing itself, though, but maybe not to the extent of this. So maybe it's worthwhile also to make it into its own concept. Anybody wants to add? Still, there would be much to add, but
Yeah, there's a lot there. There's a lot there. I like a connection I might not be able to fully draw on in the other things, like if we've got those symbols, right, and we've got our cards, right, and you're saying we can move them, and there's the relationship between quote unquote reality and then the symbol, right? It's that one of the points that like Lacan would make is that the real is the gap in the symbolic, right? And so what we do inside of the symbolic order, right, our given constellation of cards, and so we play a card in a specific way in the symbolic, we are by definition changing the real, right? So I would be less so on the position of, oh, there is the real, and then there is our transformations, right? But I would say there is this symbolic order of pure forms and their purely formal relations. And by changing and moving the symbol, moving the card, right, in the symbolic or by moving the card in the imaginary even, we are changing where the gap in our symbolic is, and so we are changing the real. So it's like I would maybe approach it from like at least on the level of like material versus it's like, you know, it I wouldn't say that it starts with material and then we add signification. And that we're already playing with that.
I didn't also say that, I think.
I don't know. I don't
if
think you necessarily did, but
No, I think
yeah.
if I were to go into my own kind of theory, which I think I should also stop, so that Pekko and you also have a transition. But like I'm probably more on that. We have a material basis for pretty many things. Like, not to say everything exists through material basis. But I won't get that far. Like, the only thing that I want to say before we move on is there were a couple of things that I thought were really exciting that now only came up from what I was doing. So if I now say, like, let's kick the Platonic out, but let's say that I was kind of trying to, Pekko, would you agree that primitive could be a good word? I mean, I know that that could also include more stuff, but if I just, the basic move that I know looked at, what could one call that if one doesn't want to go as immaterial as the Platonic, or as ideal as the Platonic?
I kind of like including the Platonic as a solution / problem, like as you were doing in a way. Like
Yeah.
I was thinking about it myself, because if you include something that is solution and a problem at the same time, you're creating a catalyst. Like it might take the process somewhere. Because like my reflection on the kind of Platonic was that, like especially when you went through it, was this, that one could divide Platonic not as a development of text, but let's say a more like generated process development of Plato, in the sense that in Plato formalizing, there is an encounter of meaning and formalism, like coming to the sort of form, and that part in itself, like making that first step of encountering the kind of evident mystery of the form, like it evident in the sense that it's there, and how that becomes called Platonic is for me actually kind of a fairly fertile. What happens after that in terms of Plato as Plato Socrates as a kind of architecture is kind of like policing then of these forms. It's like not just how they behave or how are they supposed to behave, and that for me all becomes problematic in itself. And so in a way, like if one takes the kind of first, let's say, the generative moment of Plato, then actually that is sort of fitting concept, but it's hard to take it, especially for other people, without including everything that comes after that, the policy of the Platonic forms. So this is for me like the how it's a solution and a problem, or an interesting way of saying it. And so yeah, like
Yeah,
I
it's good.
yeah, like I think like primitive has its own problematics also. Like maybe one can put a search pin on other expressions on that.
Yeah. What I just wanted to say is that, like, so I did what I now focused on was geared to that Platonic problem solution primitive part, to kind of the some of the kind of definitional properties or moves or affordances of what a card like could mean. And then there was another thing, so one other dimension that then opened, which I didn't pursue further for time reasons. When you really take seriously that the card as, what we usually call a card, and really try to kind of close read or close watch that thing and fold it out as a metaphor. So what would be the thing? What would kind of be afforded by that kind of observation? What can you actually do with a card? I don't think that's necessary, but it's a thing that one can do. And so then certain things appear that one can do with cards. And there was a whole catalog of stuff that kind of as possible, action, so to speak, came out. Again, I don't think that's necessary and the only thing that one can do, but one can do it. And if you do it, then you come to kind of moves like you can join them, you can pair them, you can combine them, you can compose with them, you can sequence them, you can stack them, you can follow them in time, you can, build stuff from them. So like, then you get a whole kind of host of possible, you can fold them, like a host of stuff that you could then do with whatever you now made into a card. And then like you could turn them around because they also have a backside. Again, none of this necessary, but maybe fun. And then there was maybe one other thing that I just need to. No, I think that was it from my end. And thanks.
Who wants to go next? There are 2 left. You're muted, you.
Yeah, I was just saying, maybe I think some of the stuff I might want to say connects a bit with some of this last discussion, so it might be a continuity, maybe. Okay, so I'll start on.
Go ahead.
Yes. Okay. I'm troubled between, like, on the one hand, I have a desire to go off into like less philosophy, and on the other hand, I want to draw also on some of the more like computer approaches to trying to understand what is a card, maybe. So I have to start maybe with saying that I think we all believe, I believe, that the card is a metaphor for the playable thing, right? The card is a metaphor for the playable thing, and it is a thing that is constituted by a lack, right? And so we call this the slot, or we can call it by something. And so this thing, when we call it the slot, right, what we are doing is we are adding a signification to the lack, right? We are creating a signifier of a lack. We are saying a slot, we are saying a path or something. So we have a thing and a metaphor for the playable thing that has lacks within it, in which other, right? The other can fit. This could be self-referential or something. But also that which is put inside, and what I find interesting about also Lacan's like symbols is that here you've got like this A, right? This is the big other. This is like the pure, complete card in itself, the pure, complete whatever, right? And the fact is that this entity doesn't exist. And so what Lacan comes up with is you've got the other, the barred other, which is the other that is signified with the lack, right? And so it does exist. I don't put too much emphasis on the existence word, but yeah. And so when we're looking at like a card is a metaphor for the playable thing that is constituted by a lack, in which in order to position myself, I create signifiers of the lack, and that lack has it can be an other that also has a lack. And so we understand now that the cards are nested, right? Because every card is the barred other, or every card has this lack. And so this is also, right, what causes, this is also desire, right? This is also the yeah. So that's I guess some of the more like on the philosophical side of things. But I would like to also point out that if I have a playable thing, it has certain it is in relation, right? Or it is in this nested relations where other things are inside of my lac slot or positioned inside of there. Now, in order for me to be able to point something out, right, or make a move, I have to myself move my moving capacity through the relations to somewhere, right? So the falling from relation to relation to relation is being able to navigate that graph is key in order to be able to reposition my repositioning capacity, right?
Mhm.
And so then on that level, what we get is we've got a map. So a map in JavaScript is a any to any mapping between types, and it is represented by the arrow function. So it can create, what we end up getting is I can have anything as a slot. It doesn't have to be a word. I could speak and have the key be a card, and then it points towards another card, and that goes whatever. And so I form a map graph of relations. And it's not to say that a card is necessarily a map, but that a map as an any-to-any mapping, relational mapping, is an extremely abstract structure that allows me to express any type of relationing in a graph kind of way. But that isn't to say that the map is necessarily like right? You could have something that is less expressive, and because of that is even more so. And without, I don't know how much time or whatever, I would point out, then going back to Lacan, we've got the notion of metonymy or metaphor, which Lacan has this notion of the signifying chain, right? Where I've got a chain of signifiers, and each one is being nested in a relation. And how does this chain get constructed? Through the relations of, I've got one, through the card graph is this signifying chain of relations. But there are two aspects to that minimum. I can't make such an exhaustive claim. Two aspects to a minimum where he talks about like what would constitute, language, and the other is metaphor, right? Where I take something from one part of the chain and I put it in the position of another. And so I actually, because at every point, because I'm at the card and I am signifying something that itself has a lack, another card. This is what Lacan refers to as the continuous deferral of meaning. We're continuously deferring meaning further and further down the card graph. And it is only through metaphor, through taking something that is in another position and putting it in another one, that you are able to traverse or cross the bar and like say what you're trying to say, because you're talking in the level of the imaginary. Yeah, and the last computer science point is that we're also talking about lambdas, right? We're talking about composition, right? Lambda calculus. We've got right? Lambda calculus is just function abstraction and application, right? With inputs and outputs, symbol binding, and substitution, where you can create complex like programs by taking other abstractions and putting them as the input of other ones and composing them, right? So that's just something I would point us out to, is like that we are also, the way that I view what we're talking about is we are talking about, we are looking at cards as a metaphor for a playable thing that looks at, that makes the act of composition something that is much more easy. And whereas in programming languages like Haskell or whatever, I've got these things, I've got these lambdas that I could compose in the same way that we're talking about composing the card graph. But with languages like JavaScript, because I have the object, that everything is an object, I can just pick this object and pick this object and just like do that whole thing all the way, and navigate through the maps and interpret the maps in order to navigate, in order to compose. That's all I have to say. No.
There is a connection which you probably thought, but I would kind of highlight it, which is that the defer, like some also play with the differ, like difffer and DEFER, and then lack. That in a way defer as a consistent of meaning sets a consistent state of lack as foundational to meaning, and that is an interesting and certainly a worthwhile connection to explore in itself, and it also in I think there is a connection between Martin's materiality and things rising from materiality in itself. Like also one form of lack is the lack of collapse, that you have a form that is two, that never comes to be one. You cannot collapse it. And it's also a lack. Slightly lack of its own, but still a lack.
Or it contains a lack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, contains a lack also. Or expresses a lack.
Yes.
Brings a lack.
If it is a signifier of a lack, it expresses a lack. Or
and
or
brings the lack to existence.
Could you, Leo, just say in how far the card for you is defined through a lack? Why is that?
So the card, so already for me, everything is constituted fundamentally by a lack, even if the lack is not internal to the object. Right?
Is that lack or is that contrast?
Lack. Like, so take for example what you're talking about with like the physical object, right? It doesn't necessarily have internally the slot where I can put something else. And like that, not having that is the lack, or is a lack. So it's like all of our objects are inherently constituted by a lack, whether they're internal or external in nature. And then
what you're trying to say is insofar as they are specific, insofar as they are not everything.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I follow the point. Where are you trying? I don't know.
I'm just poking around. Like,
Sure.
I think I know what you mean, but I don't know that I know what
so
you mean.
I'm just saying that I'm just saying that the card has a lack, as in it's got this emptiness, right, towards where the slot can go. And then we signify this emptiness by saying slot, or by saying the word path, or by saying another word, like what we were talking about the other day about placeholders. And that sometimes we don't think that the object has a lack internal to itself. Like, and that was the example you were talking about, like a physical object, like a chair. Can I necessarily put something else inside of it? Maybe not, right? But that is a lack that it has. Like, it doesn't have this other thing. This other thing is external to it, this other capacity. And like, that's what makes it also a playable thing. I'm not sure. That last claim, I have no idea, but would be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's a either a deep well or a large field, and you could approach it as a large field from many directions. The one thing maybe to point out or one notion one could make in this context is like a system that has no lack cannot have dynamism. A system that has completely fulfilled itself cannot but lack
I mean,
lack dynamism. Yeah, like, so the lack is necessary for there being movement, there being process, there being dynamism in the first place.
that is exactly that's exactly the Hegelian point there. It's that we, before there's being, there's and before there's becoming, there's nothingness, and before that there's even less than nothing. Because the lack is the most fundamental thing.
Yeah, and it is very Hegelian also. Also a kind of a like endpoint towards thesis, antithesis, synthesis is like fulfilling in itself is an endpoint because it lacks a lack.
filling the lack. Interesting. Filling the lack, but which destroys desire.
Yes, that's the and the desire is dynamism. Like this is and like I said, it's a wide field, and there is a lot of movers and shakers in that field, which is interesting on itself. I do think like visiting that field and a card is an interesting perspective overall, and a useful one.
Thank you.
This was amazing. This was so interesting. I kept thinking about both how this could inform, or maybe it already has, and I'm just realizing, the offer in terms of this, lack, desire, dynamism, and also the slot,
Yeah,
which are tangentially related, I guess. But maybe not to open the could of worms, but this was great. I understood maybe 20% of it, but really liked it.
Thanks.
It is possible, and I have like the workings of it to in the offer to think of the slot as just a recursive pattern of an offer. So, like, isn't it like you're looking at the slot being an offer in itself, and then you can create the kind of nested space from that,
Well,
which is
there you have the signifier of a lack, right? Like that, that's the card. Like it's that is the card.
Yeah, that's also like, and also giving different forms of the card of lack, because it will never fulfill its definition. No card can take the position because it retains its lack. Therefore, one could create many of them.
I want to say one thing that I think is really interesting to me, and you have to listen to it. I'm sorry. I think the phrasing of the continuous deferrer of meaning is so curious, because I think it opens at least two things. The first is a bounded. It's interesting because I've been kind of trying to like worked with this already earlier, and it kind of, I can find it back, and you can tell me if you see it also or you don't, and whatever. But like this continuous deferral of meaning allows for a non-metaphysical conception of the exterior, because it basically says that meaning is basically a resource issue.
Mm.
Like I constantly defer, and so I don't need to ask whether God or nothing or absolute or nothing. It's just a resource issue. That would very much speak with my idea of like always materiality, like no symbol, always materiality. It's just a question of like how far do we have time to care about it, basically.
So, shall we do the last one, which is anticlimactic? Climactic, maybe. We'll see. But
I'm
I'll.
slightly scared of it because I know it's gonna be a full can of worms, and I
It's
don't
gonna
have
be
that
crazy.
much time left,
I'll just
unfortunately.
open it up. Like there's also humorous short pieces included. We'll start with that. But I'll share
Nice.
the screen. Oh God. Okay, this the screen. All right. So all the cards are not here, but we'll move to the main card actually in a second. Make some space because so many things on there. So I have first like introductory, almost like warm uppy uh, card sketches that maybe point to an interesting direction. Uh, but yes, can work also as a warm up. And because of the short time, I'll be short with this. The first one is sort of flippant. It's the idea of a card mirror, which of course is a mutilation of the word camera. And it comes from this idea, which is in itself an intentional mystery. So if there was a device that works like a camera for cards that you could snap and there would be a card, what would that device be? Uh, and the whole card plays with that. And it has very simple rules, at least for the sketch, which is it just simply says you can frame a card. And then it has an potentially endless list of questions that you play with it, which is like, how does a card mirror work? How do you operate a card mirror? So it gives you the capability, but then asks how it works from you. And so the whole idea is to bring to this idea that what does it mean to snap a card into existence, which is in itself like somewhat paradoxical, perhaps, or at least yeah, something of a quality of a paradox. But it also works interestingly. I tried it out, but that's the warm up. The other one is uh, it's kind of actually kind of somewhat affinity with Pablo's direction, perhaps, but it has the sketchy title of "Card Outside Card" minimal version, and the whole idea is to start with the problem that, let's say you're outside, or well, you're in a physical space, inside or outside, and the card will now be something of that environment, whatever surrounds you, and that's your starting point slash problem. And then the card outside card gives you the most minimal tools, not the only tools, but minimal tools to work with this problem. That some sense of an environment will be a card, and you get title, which is the naming. It's in brackets because it's not necessarily necessary. It's not necessarily to use it, but you have that possibility. There is the frame. Um, we could visit the problematics of the concept of framing, but this is a minimal version. So the framing is the move that you get, which is saying from here to here, or all the blue dots, or all the street stones that glisten. All of those are framings. Detail, which is anything which takes connection to something framed, something titled, perhaps, and adds detail to that. But that detail can be an expression, description, could also be other forms, like intentionally leaving that open. And finally, you get relation, which is also optional, but that's why it's in brackets. To X as Y is the only sub description I allowed, and that's already a blemish. But there was a reason why I put it in, which is like, for example, to this thing as a deck. That's the access Y. Like you always say, to this thing as a suite, or to this thing as a game. So setting a relation sets those two things. It points to what relation, and then as the form of relation, deck, suite, whatever. Or like you could write a book to Y, like as read this book to understand the relation. So the minimality is also there to kind of open these possibilities. What does it mean that the relation is actually, you have to read this book to get the relation? So it's a relation to that book, but you have to read then also this other book to understand what the relation is, because it's the why. So that's it. So it's a instrument towards this problematic, or the question of an environment, physical presence becoming a card. And it's potentially interesting to play, at least for me. But then I might reach only 3 of these. But the third one is what is currently, by the way, a potential symbol logo for Oxel, which is a Unicode. I cannot remember the exact number, but is this. But for that, we need to scroll. I'll probably do the scrolling like this. So
by the way, I love this card Murrah thing. And yeah, I would be interested in seeing like how it can even extend beyond the visual domain, right? Because it positions us, but then we can go, and it's beautiful. I like it.
It's a device in a lack of device, and that's your problem.
Yes,
that's your desire. And all the questions are working towards
that is a fact.
Yeah.
Shit.
It's really good. Also,
it just happened.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Do say.
It is really, really amazing, and I really also like the relation part, like the to X as Y. Like that, I think that's a whole design space, kind of, or play space of very short grammatical sentences with slots that can. It's just huge. It's enormous. Yeah,
it's the
great.
Metaphoric access of meaning production.
Yes.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, exactly.
Making the relation also metaphoric, the as Y being like put in a metaphoric position.
In an operational way, right? Because you are in the play world, so immediately you start asking, how does this metaphor act upon the world, which is amazing.
And metaphoric position, that is because it is interesting.
Yeah, it is like and it's funny, and it's actually useful sometimes to do this sort of minimalism, because once you squeeze, there is a space that opens. The space you kind of potentially looked over and didn't think about, and that simply comes from the reality that since you have only minimal, you have to leave certain doors open, and you suddenly start seeing things, which is kind of like true in this 2xy as well. But yeah, so the final one.
And wait, one comment tangentially, just before you continue. Eva sent me a message like, "Oh, I have no internet. I will send you some more stuff later, but my card is mirror. And then she didn't send anything, but then I saw in your document there was the mirror, so the mirror appeared somehow. I think that's interesting.
I do have a mirror as a card. I could even
Okay, then Eva has as well.
yeah,
And
I could leave it to our
yeah,
next
amazing.
session to keep this shorter, and then we can compare this. Um, uh, but because this is kind of the main card, and of course it's the card that doesn't yet exist, but there are signs of it. It's like there is this, somebody talks about the city you never visited, and then you start your walking towards there, and you start seeing signs of the city or the culture of it, but you're not yet in the city. So we are in the similar relation with this card in itself, and that's also why its name is simply the oxel symbol, which is not to say that it's the whole oxel, but just to have a name for it, because yes, it's also related. But the key thing in this travel towards the card that doesn't exist is, as let's say, an added intentional problematization of writing a text while trying to work that text towards functionality of cards, or card-like functionality. And why it doesn't exist? Because this text is, I mean, of course it's possible to call it a card, but like I kind of want to present the bigger challenge for it, and I don't think it meets a challenge, nowhere near. But there are signs of how it could become that card that could be operate like a page, but also not just be a page, but a card. And these signs, I could point to you first of all. Okay, so it is fairly normal in scientific papers to set and start with, this is my problem, or this is the core problem that the research is working upon. But okay, what if we take that model and there is a move? Well, there's a couple of moves. Like there's first a move of setting a title, which is kind of like a motto. And that move, if we think about it, could be thought as setting like a like it's almost like something hovering in an air, like something in a pedestal. Sounds very high, like a game of culture or creation by organizational expression, but it's lacking a pedestal. Like, does it really stand there? We don't know yet. We can think about that as a move, like that in a way the text made a move to whomever, the reader, but also the writer, of putting this title. And now there is the game board state is like something is hovering there but lacking the pedestal, so it needs other moves towards that. But then the second move going to this problem is this, like underneath this title, the game slash text makes another move, which is this dilemma, which is like almost like somebody throws you a puzzle, like thinking that the text throws you a puzzle, whether you are the reader or writer, but not a normal puzzle. You cannot be sure if there's even a solution to it, and there's certainly no one solution there. There's a kind of infinity of directions that the solutions could go, and you can never be sure, is it actually a solution? You have to kind of build that. So in a way, there is a move in the title, and there's something card-like there, and there is a move in the dilemma as a move, like almost like challenging the text itself to come, um, um, and there is a card-likeness to that move, and then in that reading, which is completely kind of meta to this text, the sort of crack in the wall of the dilemma could be thought of, playfully thought of, as almost like a discourse of a game, like a log save of a certain gaming process of where they're working with this puzzle of how to crack this dilemma, like make a hole in its wall. And but then what they come up with here is two questions, and this is the final kind of appearance, like looming appearance of a potential card, is that while they kind of work through the crack, they ultimately turn it into two moves by leaving two questions, which is almost like challenging the dilemma itself and the text itself, by asking back, like, what stops games from expanding beyond their bubbles, forming relations, thread working into the world in the manner of organization, and what stops organizations from enabling fiction to affect their operations and change their behaviors in the manner of games. So like these moves are almost like in a chess, like one side moves and the other side moves. I mean, there could be multiple sides in this kind of a game, but these can be thought of as moves also slash cards thrown back towards the dilemma itself. And all of this makes me think, and in a very fuzzy way, start to see the potential shape of this sort of card coming about, but also taking the role of what is normally text. And I don't know how far that goes and how well it functions, but there are like awarenesses of that, like very sketchy lines, having some shape, but not having the full thing. But something of that idea. And I wanted, as last, to give you this card that is not yet a card, a city, and that is a direction, but we're not there yet. But by pointing towards it by the signs that are present in the landscape of this text. And that's it.
Wow. Impressed by the poetry that everyone just embedded in their language today. This was also very, very, very beautiful.
I didn't see this coming.
Yeah.
Actually, this is crazy. This whole thing.
Yeah, and like poetry and depth of thought, and also like it is almost like set this sort of landscape, and each made their own mining excavations, and then everybody walked us into very deep into a particular special mine that they had built, much deeper than one expected.
This makes me think that like this is a special type of session, right? I get the impression that that we keep on saying over and over again that it's an inexhaustible, thing, and I would like to see this form of session repeated.
Yeah, I think definitely that's something to put in a process of. It can be exactly this form. It can be a modification of this form, but generally, I think there is something to be pinned down and noted of this approach, of each one like taking this like their own dive.
The cross-pollination
Yes.
is just so rich. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right on this.
And I was just sorry if I interrupt. I was just thinking that like if you take all what we for now share today, and if any cast or so that we might, publicly submit, so to speak, would be of a similar kind of disarray, that could be rather beautiful. I mean, this kind of non-conclusive, I mean, we're not kind of converging on one point. There was, certainly touches between fingers and so stuff, but like nobody is kind of ending in the same helicopter space. But everybody's saying something really meaningful, I guess, about what what oxels are, what cards are, and to release such a kind of, what's then the word for that? Do you call it chimeric, or what's a good word?
That's one. Yes.
That's a
Yeah.
word that was good. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
like a book that reads like 4 books, like.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And that's I think that like with if we were to take like publications or whatever with Zorg or whatever, I would love to see like just Zorg be like this unity in diversity of exploration, even on an outward level.
I think there is one strength in this sort of game and play approach, which is kind of like you can create not a unity, but certain kind of form that brings together, which is the game form. But that game form then creates differentiations. It actually takes people elsewhere. Like it is even a rather native form for certain kinds of games, like role-playing games come to mind. That's the whole point. Like you create this sort of way of getting people elsewhere, where they kind of get all these rules and so on. But that precisely takes them to a point that all their games are very different. Um, uh, and I do think there is something to that strength. Like I don't think bringing unity, like giving people a form to play, is actually against the diversity. In some ways, it's actually pro-diversity because it can create diversity in a place where there was not much anything there. Like if we can give them the sense of, say, the oxel or the card, um, then what the space that opens from there is the diversity of cards or diversity of oxels. Um, uh, and I think that is important in current culture. Like having gone through the years of looking at arts publications where everybody's writing freely, and then looking at nobody reads them because everybody has enough. Like they also want something that is like take me elsewhere, please. Like give me something that I can bridge with you, um, uh, rather than just impressions. And I do think these things can combine precisely in this. It's like you give them the form that is a bridge to travel, but then once you travel the bridge, you are actually enabled.
Yeah,
Enabled.
I must admit that precise thing came up when someone was asking me about Zorg. They were like, I look at the videos, it's all over the place. How do I latch on? So, or like, how do I traverse the initial bridge into like the world or whatever? So I think I agree with what you're saying, but I would also say that there's the possibility of multiple bridges.
So you like definitely, actually, I think in a way necessity. And
Yeah,
this is also
different
why,
parts of the semi-verse.
yeah, they're all perspectives. It's not all oxels.
Yeah.
It's not all cards. It's not all of both of them. It is. I mean, there was a like some, I don't know, weeks, months back, that these were called projections. Like card is a projection, oxel is a projection for that, partly for that reason. Like also an sort of aware notation towards Plato's cave and projections on a wall, but in a positive sense. Like it's saying that these things are something. They are projections. They're putting a form, but they are just projections. They cannot take a fundamental position in itself.
Play with the fantasy.
Yes, but give the playground to let that fantasy travel to a certain point where it starts to play with the fantasy, and we are kind of doing that already now with the
I
card.
think we're there. Like we're there, and I think it's. I mean, I don't know. I think it's happening.
I think it's also partly that we have taught each other in this process, and then the
Yeah.
key question of this travel is to how to bring others towards maybe not the same, but at least similar. And for that, you need this sort of bridge. You need some traveling. You need to get people there. And with that, I will actually press stop the recording if I can make this button to work. No, it wasn't that.
Goodbye, YouTube.
Goodbye, YouTube. Once, yes. Goodbye.